Ladies and gentlemen, it's a little bit like being called for a viva voce out of turn. But I will try and tell you this story as quickly as I can. I call it the future of learning, not because I observed it to be such, but because I learned that from children. So it's a lesson learned entirely from children. But to start with the future of learning, if we look at what is it that, is there anything wrong? Otherwise, why are we talking about the future? Why are we having this conference? What could be wrong? So I thought of a simple example. Imagine that a young man of 18 has just completed his schooling here in Window, going for a job interview with a technological company. A young technological startup company. And his interviewer says to him, "So what can you do well?" And he says, "Sir, my handwriting is very good. I know very good grammar, and I can recite the 17 times tables." No, that's not, that would have got him a job about 150 years ago. We won't get him a job now. So what is the change that we need to do? I ran into this problem in a very, very different context, 14 or 15 years ago. I was working in New Delhi, and I used to teach rich people's children, and I decided that I would see what would happen if I gave a computer, just gave it on the street, in a slum, built into a wall like an ATM, and if I just left it for children to use. It was 3 feet off the ground, no explanations anywhere, English internet on the screen. And people said they'll break it and they'll steal it, but that's not what happened. About 8 hours later, what we found was that children were teaching other children how to browse. Now, 14 years ago, this was absolutely not expected. They didn't know any English. They don't go to school. They've never seen a computer, so what's going on over here? I repeated this experiment over and over and over again for the next 5 years. I got some money from the World Bank, and I was able to show that groups of children, when left to themselves, it's very important to leave them alone with a computer and the internet, will teach themselves how to use the internet to find out things, and they will do so exceedingly well and in a very short period of time. In other words, they will teach themselves to compute by themselves. The results were that in 9 months, given one computer, 300 children will reach the same level of computing competency as an average office secretary in the West. Now that brought a lot of big questions. I continued to work on what would happen next. So what if they learn how to use a computer? So what do they do? But I discovered that 3 or 4 months down the line, the children run into Google. All this time they were playing games and they were doing painting and all that. Now they get Google and they start typing things into Google. And the local teachers started to say, you know, the children's English, it's become perfect. And the quality of their homework has become very deep. And I was thinking to myself, my God, what have I done? Is this learning? This is copying pages of Google. But there's a big surprise waiting both for me and for you. 10 years later in England, I discovered that when groups of children copy down from Google, they know exactly what they're doing. If 3 years later you ask them the same question, they'll give you back the same answers. It doesn't happen if it's one child in one computer. It happens if there are groups of children, a single computer, and the absence of supervision. I started to see how far it would go. And I tried giving them more and more complex exercises to do. They would say, how do we do these things? I said, I don't know. You guys are supposed to be very clever, you do it yourself. And just to impress me, they would do all kinds of things.
he's my cousin.
Yes, he's my cousin.
They've done this by themselves. She's trying to change her pronunciation. And she's doing that by speaking into a speech-to-text engine and having that speech-to-text engine turn backwards and say it back to her. And then listening to see if it's saying the same thing that she says. She invented that. I didn't tell her. Some of you may know her actually, because she's now works for a call center in Hyderabad and might have tried to sell you a credit card. I continued to make it harder and harder and harder, ending finally with an experiment in 2007 where I said, I'm going to disprove everything that I have said. I'm going to make a research question. Can 12-year-old Tamil-speaking Indian children in a village learn the biotechnology of DNA replication by themselves on an open-air computer in English? And I thought, well, I'll give them a test, they'll get a 0. I'll come back after 3 months and they'll get another 0. But they didn't. When I came back after 3 months, the children came in and said, we've understood nothing. So I said, well, so what did you do? You just kept looking at these screens. So then one little girl says to me, no, apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've understood nothing else. So this happened in southern India. They had gone from 0 to 30% in 2 months. You know, this is an educational impossibility. This can only happen in the 21st century. In a language that they don't know, 10 years ahead of their time, how did they manage this? But the measurement says that they did. The groups had something to do with it, the computer had something to do with it, the internet had something to do with it. But 30% in our local schooling system is a fail. So how do I get them to pass? I found a local girl who is a friend of these children and I asked her to help them. She said, I can't, I don't know any biotechnology, how do I help them? I said, well, I don't have a teacher over here, so why don't you just stand behind the children and every time they do anything, just say, wow, that's fantastic, how did you do it? Can you do some more? Can you show me a little bit more? In other words, play the role of the grandmother. Use admiration. Since that's about all you can do at this point in time. She did that quite well for 2 months. The scores jumped to 50%. Same as my control school, which was an expensive private school in New Delhi with a trained biotechnology teacher. When I saw that graph, I knew there is another way. There is a way that is possible now that wasn't possible earlier. We haven't seen it before, but this is how it works. I came back into England with this hypothesis. Groups of children using the internet can learn anything by themselves. I started working with schools in the Gateshead area in northeastern England, where it's a lower middle class kind of area. It was very simple. The method is exceedingly simple. It's groups. It's bringing the hole in the wall experiment inside the classroom.
And Sugata's new teaching methods have now also arrived on these shores. The lessons learned from his very first experiment in India with hole-in-the-wall computers are now being applied to schools in Gateshead.
Stephen? Bonjour,
The
good.
process is that you take a group of children, you ask them to make groups of 4. Each group of 4 is allowed to use one computer with an internet connection. And then you trigger off the system with a question.
That question is very important. That's where the teacher comes in. People often say, are you saying that teachers are not needed? Of course not, they are. Their job is to convert the curriculum into such absorbing questions that children left alone will, in trying to impress their teacher, answer it by themselves, the way they've done in all of these experiments. We know from Uppam that they will go up to 30% by themselves. After that, you need admiration. In England, I started looking for grandmothers. I sent out newspaper articles saying that I'm building self-organizing learning environments. If you are a British granny, if you have broadband and a web camera, will you give me 1 hour of your time per week for free? In 2 weeks, I got 200. I know more British grandmothers than anyone you know. So they formed what is called the Granny Cloud. The Granny Cloud sits up there on the internet. If there is a school in trouble anywhere in the world, you beam a grand using Skype, and she goes in there and sorts things out. Here's a quick look at that stuff.
That's right, as fast as you can. As fast as you can. You can't catch me. You say it. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man.
So that's it. It's really, really simple. You've got to subsidize electricity and broadband. If you are below 15, it should be free. I don't know how. I'm not a businessman, but somebody has to work that one out. We need to change the curriculum. There's no point walking into a class and saying we are going to teach trigonometry. You'll get a lot of big yawns. Instead of that, I went into a Chinese classroom once and I said, take out your iPads. I took the iPads out. I said, how does your iPad know where it is? When you say my location, it tells you. How does it do it? 25 minutes later, the children said, Sugata, you know what? There is a subject called trigonometry. We need a curriculum which is based on big questions. What's it all for? We need a self-organizing, fault-tolerant technology, computers that repair themselves. We need self-organized learning environments, we need self-organized assessment, and we need the grand cloud. You put all of it together, which is what I'm trying to do with this little bit of prize money that I got, you should get what I would call a school in the cloud. A school which is operated by and operated with the internet. The medium that the children consider their own, brought right inside their schools. In 2 years' time, I'll know how this works in one of the most remote parts of the world where I'm building this. And at that point, perhaps if you call me back, I'll give you a glimpse of the future learning. Thank you.